In today's video, I'm going to be talking about whether MTG Marvel Super Heroes is a good set for draft. Now, good will change for every single person, but this is my personal opinion after playing with the cards and based on my experience playing a lot of draft and a lot of different draft formats. Now, I'm going to start with the pros, and then I'm going to move to some of the cons, then give an overall opinion at the end. But I will say the biggest pro of this set for me is that it feels like there's a lot of cards that get better if you build around them a little. Like, you don't have to build a deck completely around them, but if you get this like little package of cards, they can do really good work. So like a good example of this would be like if you have Knight of Wundagore and then Kid Loki in your deck, and you feel like, oh, I have this Kid Loki, and then I put a little bit of card draw in my deck, and then my Knight of Wundagore grows every time my Kid Loki grows, and then a card like Knight of Wundagore, which you don't necessarily really want in your deck, feels like it gets a little bit of boost to be like a boost to be able to be playable in your deck, that sort of thing. A card like Ronin Shadowstalker, when you put like Stolen Stark Tech in your deck, all of a sudden you get to play your combat trick to protect your guy, kind of like instant speed by using the pay 2 life mode without having to have any mana up, and then you get to sacrifice that kind of useless equipment to kill something. That's like a cool little 1-2 punch. So when you have like one Ronin and 2 Stark Techs, you're like, wow, I've kind of got this little micro package of cards that are not really like that useful on their own necessarily, or cards I wouldn't play in a vacuum, but that are useful together. So those sorts of things are really, really cool in this format. There's a ton of these sorts of little synergies where it's like, yeah, I don't want this card by itself, but because I have this other card, I actually am happy playing this thing. And then there's just like a bunch of little minor build arounds, like Rick Jones and your green-white decks can be like surprisingly playable. Like I played it and it was actually like pretty good because I had like enchantment-based removal spells and I had a bunch of heroes, so he was always hitting like some cards for me to find. Or like Echo just has like a bunch of things that he can do, and that's pretty cool as well. So there's lots of little synergy packages of cards that make you willing to play cards that you would not otherwise play, and I think that's very cool. I also think that the power-up mechanic is pretty interesting in the way it plays out, where you kind of have these cards that you're fine playing early sometimes and fine playing late sometimes, but then there's this awkward middle period where you don't really want to play them and like expose them to removal before you have to spend the full mana to play them and activate them anyway. And I think that's kind of interesting, where a lot of the times it's like, I'll play my card, I'll activate it later. I'll play my card, I'll activate it later. Or in the late game, I'll play it with whatever mode. But you always kind of have the option to play these ones, so it's not just like on or off. There's like this awkward middle phase where you can play them if you want to, and oftentimes you won't. Like Avayala, you don't usually want to play it on turn like 5. You want to like wait till turn 6, but if you have nothing to do, do you want to get that 2-2 in place so that it can attack as a 3-3, or do you want to wait? That's been an interesting decision point, I think, as well. Moving on to some of the cons in the format, I think the colors are pretty imbalanced. That's probably not a hot take. That's just kind of how it has felt. When you play a blue and white deck, you get access to cards like Justice and Red Guardian at uncommon, or like at common, which is more egregious. You get like Hero in Training and Shield Deployment Drone, and these are all 3-drops, and these are all cards that feel like they have an outsized impact on the game, specifically the commons, because you run into them a lot. You'll play against decks that have like 3 Hero in Training, and you just feel like you can't win sometimes, where it's just like, yeah, their 3-drop got them value, and my 3-drop got me like a treasure token or something like that, and you're just like, well, I wasn't playing that color, so I didn't have access to that card. And it feels like those cards aren't adequately contested to the point where like I've gotten them like 5th pick or something like that, and you're like, that shouldn't happen. The card is very good. It's like people aren't really willing to take the commons that highly, I guess, but that has been detrimental to the format. Maybe there will be some auto correction where people just start like first picking those cards or second picking those cards, taking them highly, but that's been a pretty big detriment to the format, I think, where the blue and white cards just are like kind of juiced compared to their competition. So you feel like if you're playing some of the other colors, you need to have like a specific reason to do it. You're like at a disadvantage, or like if you end up in those colors and you don't have like a great like card pulling you in, sometimes you just feel like you're just getting outclassed through no like fault of your own. You're just playing worse colors than your opponent, and that's not a great feeling. I will say there are some interesting things with like when there is these sort of imbalances, you can end up with these interesting scenarios where if you are willing to take the leap into one of the worst archetypes, or you get a reason to draft that archetype, you can still find some success. So for example, black-red, not a very popular color combination in this set. Generally kind of the villain's strategy for black-red hasn't really come together. But if you open one of the black-red rares in a pack where you don't have any other real like incentives, or you get past one of them really early in the draft, so you know that it's going to be an open lane, sometimes one rare can like pull you into the deck, and then you can get a kind of really strong version, or a version where it feels like you just have all commons and a bunch of rares because other players aren't willing to draft that deck. And so that can be a kind of fun little like lottery off-meta strategy where you get a reason to go into the off-meta deck, and then the cards kind of flow to you naturally because a lot of players don't really want to play those decks. And this obviously is going to sometimes reflect the like knowledge of your opponents, where if your opponents are like drafting like normally, then and they don't necessarily put an emphasis on blue and white cards or things like that, you might like not have a reason to do that because you could just get all the good blue white cards. But if your opponents are kind of like, okay, I know what's up, I'm going to try to draft these cards, and they can test them, then you can end up with really juiced versions of the lower tier archetypes, which is kind of interesting as well. But generally, I think that the color imbalance is a big negative for the format. It makes the gameplay a little bit more repetitive when it feels like you play against similar decks over and over and over. And one thing about the blue and white decks is that it feels hard for them to run out of things to do, which just reduces the amount of games that they have compared to some of the other decks where they like flood out or something, because there's like Connive in blue, so they can draw and discard. There's like Scrying in white from like the equipment. There's like plenty of like, there's like a few mana sinks because of power up abilities. There's a couple of those running around. And then there's also just like plenty of card draw and things like that from like Bold Biochemist and Hero in Training, which we already mentioned. So the blue and white decks just feel like they always have this gas in the tank, and like they're not going to flood out as easily as some of the other decks, even though maybe they have also got really good early game because a lot of their early plays are quite good. So that's been kind of a downside of the format. The other big downside I want to talk about is Super Hero Civil War. This card is just not a good design for limited. I like to be, I generally don't even talk about the rares and stuff because like you don't see them that often, but this one is pretty egregious in the fact that you almost can't beat it. It feels like whenever it comes down. I've played against it many times. I've played with it a couple times. I've like played it in like decks that are pretty bad because I was like experimenting and trying things. And like the games where you play it, you still win. Like your deck can be bad, like a 4-color, like not really doing much tech. And then you just play Superhero Civil War and you still win because you take like almost always like 2 of their best creatures and then hit them for a bajillion damage. And then the game's just like over when you do the fight thing. And like, it's just really, really juiced as a card. And it's like not very fun to play against. And it's so much better than like the cards that you're just playing on an average basis that it's just like kind of stunning. You're like, what am I supposed to do here? They just like take your creature and they take like one of your like creature tokens or something like that, and you're just like in so much trouble. So that's been a big downside as well, is I think that individual card can actually have, I didn't think an individual card could actually have like a meaningful impact on the format, but I think if you took Superhero Civil War out of the format, I would enjoy it more by like a decent amount, because every game that card comes down, it kind of ruins the game. Like whether I'm the one playing it or my opponent's the one playing it, it's not a very satisfying card to play with. So that's kind of a negative of the format as well. So pros, lots of cool build arounds, lots of little cards that like make me want to be like, ooh, if I take this card, I can take this other card that plays well with this. I think that's pretty interesting. Cons, Superhero Civil War, blue and white being a bit too juiced. And also, there are a lot of must-kill threats in the format, which is kind of like, it puts a lot of strain when you're playing, where you don't feel like you can save your removal spell because they play Jessica Jones, and if you don't kill Jessica Jones, you feel like you almost instantly lose. And like turn 3, you don't really want to have a game where it feels like you have to kill their uncommon or you lose the game. But like that's kind of the way it feels with that sort of card. There's a few other cards like that where like if you don't instantly kill it, you feel like you lose. There's a lot of pressure on removal. You have to take removal very highly in this set, which is kind of similar to most sets, but then other players do that. You just don't see the removal spells, and then they play Jessica Jones and you lose the game. And so there's that sort of strain on the format as well. Not to mention some of the rares also being like must-kill threats or they take over the game type deals. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the format. Overall, I'd give it kind of a medium grade. I have been having fun playing the like build around cards. I think that's given a lot of replayability, but it does feel kind of rough when you play against the similar matchups a lot. I feel like I play against blue white like 3 or 4 times a draft sometimes, just because there's so many good cards to that deck and you can just play against it a lot. So that's a factor. Or just like heavy white decks or things like that. I don't feel like I play against like black red decks very much, and when I do, I feel like I'm like supposed to win. Like that's not exactly where you want to be. Or you like, okay, well, I know they're playing this deck, they must have one of these like short list of like 3 or 4 rares, that sort of thing. So that's been kind of my thoughts on the format. I think overall pretty solid. If the meta continues to adjust and people start taking the blue white cards higher, it might end up going up a little bit. But overall, pretty medium as far as sets go, but pretty medium is still pretty fun because it's still draft. You're still having a good time building around your cards. There's just things that I wish were a little bit better, but that's how draft goes. Not every set is the perfect home run. Sometimes you're just going to take your singles, take your doubles. This is a baseball analogy for folks that don't know that. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on the format. Maybe clarified some thoughts you were having yourself, or expressed some new ideas, maybe some new avenues for you to explore or things to appreciate about the format. But that's going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll talk to you next time.